7th Circle Gaming. We're journeying to a galaxy far, far away and a long time ago in Star Wars Battlefront 2. And after a bit of full disclosure, we'll be taking a look at a couple of screenshots. Of course, you're welcome to pause the video here and read through all of these disclosures now, or if you'd like to not, don't do that and we'll move on to the screenshots. In our first screenshot, we usually share with you what the game world looks like and we talk about the user interface, and this is no exception. The user interface is centered on the bottom center and the bottom right hand corner of the screen, with the character health displayed at the bottom center and the cooldown timers as well as the character abilities indicated by various icons at the bottom right. This leaves the majority of the screen space available for rendering the in-game world, which is very much based on the franchise that the game is drawing its inspiration from. Now then, the game does include not only on-foot segments but also vehicle segments as well. And an example of this is what we're looking at now. Of course, this has been set up special to demonstrate what one of those vehicle segments is going to look like. So there are a couple of differences from the campaign mode, most notably the ticket counter located at the top center of the screen. That aside, during the campaign mode, the rest is all as we see here. At the center left hand corner of the screen, although it is somewhat difficult to see, there is a speed indicator. At the center right hand corner of the screen we have the vehicle health indicator. Of course, the cooldown timer hasn't necessarily changed, it's still at the bottom right. Again, we want to leave the majority of the play space available for rendering the in-game world, and in this particular case, the vehicle that the player is flying. All seemingly very accurately rendered to the franchise that the game is drawing its inspiration from. This game can be played either from the first or the third person perspective. We've seen the third person perspective, and what we're looking at now is the first person perspective. We don't have many changes to the user interface. The only major change is the overlay of a cockpit, seemingly very much based on one of the vehicles in the universe or the franchise, which fans of the franchise may have already identified as the Incom T-65 X-Wing. Now then, the game does permit a fair amount of customization even in the campaign mode, and one of those is what we're looking at now. Prior to beginning a game, or beginning a mission rather, or if the player needs to restart a particular mission for any reason, the game does provide the player with the opportunity to select a different weapon, all of which are inspired by the franchise, although not necessarily 100% film accurate. The game will also permit players the ability to select various perks, which the game calls cards, which are either earned through completing various challenges granted by the game, or found located around one of the in-game levels. Finally, I know there's a lot of screenshots. This is the last one. The game will provide the player with a selection of in-game cutscenes, and an example of that is what we're looking at now. There aren't any particular choices to make in one of these in-game cutscenes, so we don't need to say anything more about it. And now then, on to our first proper chapter, which is as always immersion. Here the game has earned a 10 out of 15. The game will utilize presentation to get players invested into the world. As we've seen earlier, the game can be played either in a first or third person perspective depending on what the player's preference is. the game world is very much centered on an existing science fiction fantasy franchise. Therefore, the game is relatable only in theory, if not reality, because of course laser weapons and various laser swords don't exist in reality. The game will utilize challenge to get players invested into the in-game world, this taking the form primarily of fast-paced action that the player must react to. To a lesser degree, the game does provide player agency to get players invested into the world. As we saw earlier, the game does, in the campaign mode, provide some customization options, weapons and perks primarily. In the arcade mode, which is still a solo play mode, the game does permit some appearance customization in addition to the previously noted perks and weapons choices. In campaign mode at least, the game does utilize story to get players invested into the world, in the sense that the in-game events are presented as part of a much larger plot. Finally, for immersion, the game will utilize audio to get players invested into the world. All of the sounds are seemingly very much grounded in the franchise. There are character lines that are spoken at various points in relation to various stimuli. When the player is playing as a hero character, the sound alikes are either reasonable or the actual actor who played them in the films that the franchise is or that the game is based on. Yeah, that's a bit of a mouthful there. So then, on to difficulty. Here the game has earned a 7.25 out of 15. The game can be played by utilizing a keyboard and mouse or a gamepad, and it doesn't require any additional configuration to get it to switch. The gamepad controls may confuse some players, as it doesn't necessarily clarify whether a button press needs to be pressed and held or simply tapped in order to activate a particular ability. However, the keyboard and mouse controls do work reasonably, even if they are somewhat awkward to activating a particular skill in a hurry, or in a tense situation rather. Players may find that the vehicles are more effectively or accurately controlled with the gamepad rather than the keyboard and mouse. The user interface, as we've seen, is fairly minimalistic and functional. The game provides only basic difficulty settings, which are fairly typical for the genre. The descriptions of how they're going to impact gameplay is also very basic. Now then, moving on to lasting appeal, in which we answer the question of what's going to keep players playing through to story end and keep the game installed on hard drives. The game does not have any substantive DLC available. If there is DLC, it is very much centered on the multiplayer modes, or it is purely cosmetic. There are no mods available for the game through any source that is verifiable and does not require an additional login. There are, on the other hand, several game modes available, even for solo play, including custom and an epilogue story campaign. The game is a story-based game if the player is playing purely in solo play and is only interested in the campaign, so the replay value does vary by the player. Players may choose to retry the campaign or the various challenge modes on a higher or lower difficulty setting. Now then, on the other hand, where the game is going to gain a significant amount of its lasting appeal is that it is part of an existing franchise, and players may choose simply to keep the game installed on their hard drives if they're interested in inhabiting that franchise world for a little while. So then, all that said, where does the game stand overall? Overall, the game has earned an 8.75 out of 15. The game does seemingly make very effective use of the existing property to create immersion. The game also utilizes fast-paced action to create immersion. The story may appeal to some players, but not necessarily all. Certainly not as much as the pace of the action does. There is a significant amount of content, even if the player is only interested in solo play. Now then, one highly subjective statement, so I hope you do have those grains of salt ready. For a Star Wars fan, the game may be considered to be an 11 or possibly as high as a 15 out of 15, but that is a very subjective score. So then, since there really isn't anything more to say about the game that wouldn't be incredibly subjective or getting into things that we don't want to discuss, we will just say thank you very much for watching all the way to the end if you did. We look forward to seeing you on the next video, and from 7th Circle Gaming, goodbye.